Kendrick Mosley didn't want to be a viral sensation. He didn't want to be a civil rights headline or a case study in a textbook. On a sweltering Sunday in Marietta, Georgia, Kendrick wanted exactly one thing: to finish a chapter of his book and drink his tea in the shade. But in suburban America, peace is often a gated commodity, and for Kendrick, that gate was about to be challenged. While two officers moved in to question his very existence, a neighbor named Tessa was watching from a balcony. She didn't yell or intervene. She just hit record. What she captured wasn't just a 10-minute confrontation. It was the moment a perfect community began to fracture. Today, we are looking at the anatomy of an assumption and how one silent witness changed everything for Unit 412B. Sunday afternoons were Kendrick's ritual. As a UX designer for hospital interfaces, his brain spent 60 hours a week in a high-stress world of logic. He chose Marietta because it was quiet. He liked the trimmed hedges and the way the sun hit the tennis courts. He was a homeowner who paid his dues on time, dues that paid for the very water he was sitting next to. But the quiet always felt conditional. Ever since he moved in, there were signs. There was the time the HOA manager asked to see his closing documents because a neighbor reported a possible unauthorized move-in. Then there were the constant fines for his trash bins, even though Kendrick had photos proving they were tucked away. It wasn't one big event, it was 1,000 tiny paper cuts. By the time this Sunday rolled around, he was already exhausted. Kendrick settled into his chair near the deep end, sipping hibiscus tea and reading his book. Then, a black and white patrol SUV appeared, crawling past the gate before backing up. Two officers stepped out. They didn't walk with urgency, but with a bored kind of purpose. Officer Trent Harley and Corporal Bryce Fenwick approached him. They didn't ask if there was a problem, they demanded to know what he was doing there. When Kendrick explained he lived there, they asked for ID. Fenwick examined his driver's license and community key card like they were forgeries. He told Kendrick that 412B wasn't usually the profile they saw for that address. The officers began a micro-interrogation, asking if he had guests or if his sister really lived there. They were looking for a reason to justify the call they had received about a suspicious individual. High above the courtyard, Tessa Brindley was making a choice. She knew Kendrick. They talked about their dogs and local traffic. She saw the way the officers were crowding him, invading his space in a deliberate way. Her teenage daughter asked why she was filming, and Tessa told her it was because things like this don't always end well, and she wouldn't be the neighbor who saw nothing. By filming, Tessa changed the physics of the interaction. The officers were now performing for an audience. The tension reached a breaking point when Fenwick made a demand that changed everything. He didn't just want ID anymore, he wanted to enter Kendrick's home. He told Kendrick that if he really lived there, he should take them inside and prove it. Kendrick knew his rights. He knew that saying no made him look guilty, but saying yes meant losing his dignity. He looked at the officers and told them he wasn't taking them into his home because he hadn't done anything wrong. The air turned ice cold as Fenwick's hand moved closer to his belt. That was when Tessa's voice screamed from the sky, "He lives there." When Tessa hit stop on her recording, she didn't just save a video file, she saved Kendrick's reputation. Within 6 hours, that video had bypassed the neighborhood gate and landed on the screens of thousands. But as the views climbed, a digital war began. On the community Facebook pages, the neighborhood split. Some argued he should have just been more polite to the officers, while others pointed out that he had already provided proof of residence. Kendrick sat in his living room, the blue light of his phone illuminating a face that hadn't slept. He began organizing a folder of evidence. He realized the anonymous caller wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a campaign. He saw the pattern of the trash can notices and the noise complaints. Someone was trying to paper him out of the neighborhood, hoping he would get tired of the embarrassment and move away. Kendrick called in reinforcements, meeting with an old friend and community advocate named Tasha Murrell. They looked over the stack of folders in her dimly lit office. Tasha told him they were trying to find a violation since they couldn't find a crime. They decided to bypass the HOA and go straight to internal affairs, filing formal complaints and gathering witness statements from other neighbors like Mr. Fry, who had watched the whole thing from his patio. Pressure began to build. The local news picked up the story, and the headline described a homeowner harassed at his own pool. The city eventually issued a notice that both officers were being placed on administrative leave pending a review. But the real showdown was yet to come. An emergency HOA assembly was called for Saturday morning at the clubhouse. The room was buzzing with strained tension and the sound of clinking coffee cups. Trevor Lang, the HOA president, tried to hide behind corporate language, talking about inclusive environments and safety protocols. But the residents weren't having it. Tessa stood up and demanded a formal apology. Then, Beatrice Rowan, a resident who had lived there for decades, stood up and reminded everyone that the neighborhood had faced similar issues years ago and had chosen to move forward, not backward. Finally, Kendrick stood. He told the room he didn't ask to be a hero or a symbol. He just expected to be treated like a neighbor, not a question mark. He told them he had better things to do than relive the same moment every Black man he knew had already lived 10 times. In the weeks that followed, the internal investigation concluded. Officer Harley received a formal reprimand, and Corporal Fenwick was placed on extended unpaid leave with mandatory retraining. It wasn't the perfect justice many wanted, but it was a recognition that the incident shouldn't have happened. The HOA was forced to rewrite its bylaws, banning anonymous profiling and changing how security calls were handled. More residents began showing up to meetings to listen rather than complain. Tessa joined the newsletter team to help welcome new families personally, making sure they felt they belonged from day one. Kendrick stayed quiet. He didn't want a spotlight, but he did start writing down his reflections. He wrote an essay called The Chair by the Pool, which was published in a local magazine. He pinned the small paycheck to his fridge as a reminder. One Saturday, he saw a new family moving in. The father smiled and asked if Kendrick was from around there. Kendrick smiled back and told him he lived in 412B and that they had picked a good spot. As he walked his dog, he realized that he didn't have to prove anything anymore. He belonged, not because he won a case, but because he always had. The story of Unit 412B wasn't just about Kendrick, it was about the choice every neighbor has to make. It was about the difference between closing the blinds or hitting record. If this story resonated with you, consider what role you play in your own community. Awareness is the first step, but action is what creates change. Let's keep these conversations going so that stories like Kendrick's eventually become a thing of the past. Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that shape our world.